In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a purse out of an old jacket. You could also use any other type of fabric to make this purse. For this project, we're going to need scissors, a seam ripper, an old jacket, interfacing, thread, magnetic closures, zip ties, and measuring tape. So this is the jacket that I started with. It's an old suede jacket. It was a hand-me-down, but it was quite marked up, so I wanted to find a way to repurpose it. I started by making a mock-up of the purse that I wanted to create, and I did a few tests on either side of the bag. I did a flat edge for one side, and then I did a more pointed edge for the other side, because I just wanted to see what I liked better when creating this bag. I decided to go with the more pointed edge because I found it was easier to access within the bag, and I feel like it lied better. I also did some tests with bias strip finishing and how long I wanted the facing. I think when doing something like this, it's always important to do a test before you start working with your actual fabric. Using our seam ripper, we're going to remove any extra added details that's currently on the coat. In my case, that's belt loops and buttons. And we want to be really careful when removing these items not to leave any extra holes. Next, we're going to use our scissors to cut out any of the existing lining. In my case, there's a little bit of interfacing in my coat, but I'm not going to worry about that in the moment. The main goal is just to separate the lining from the jacket. The third step, we're going to use our seam ripper again to detach some of the seams. The goal here is to get our jacket lying as flat as possible. So now with this flat piece of fabric, we're ready to cut out our pattern pieces. This is where you have to be a little creative. For example, you may need to include some of the jacket seams into the design of your bag, or you may need to attach two pieces of your jacket to create a larger piece that you're then going to use for your bag. You can also include any of the existing features of your jacket. So for instance, my jacket had pockets, and I'm going to use those pockets as the lining piece. So there's an existing pocket that I no longer have to create. And this is just taking advantage of the existing material that you have. The first step of sewing is going to be attaching your facing piece to your outside piece. And here I'm just making a slight alteration to the pocket as well. The fabric that I'm using is quite thin, so I want to add some structure to the bag. And one of the ways I'm going to do this is with interfacing. So I just cut out a strip that I'm placing on the top of the outside piece on the wrong side of the fabric, and I'm going to iron that down. And then I'm going to do a top stitch right beside the seam, catching the seam allowance on the facing piece. And this just helps create a crisper edge. The next step is to add interfacing to our two bottom pieces. So we're just going to cut out the interfacing and iron it onto those two pieces on the wrong side of the fabric. Even if the fabric that you're using is a little thicker, it's nice to have that structure on the bottom of your purse. Now we're ready to attach the two main pieces of the bag. So we've attached now the facing and the outside, and now we're going to attach those two pieces together. So making sure that we're lining up our seams, we're going to place those right sides together and sew on either edge. The next step, we're ready to attach the bottom of the bag to the purse. We're going to take our two bottom pieces and place them wrong sides together, sandwiching the interfacing between the two. Then we're going to place the two bottom pieces to the right side of the bottom of the bag, making sure the side seam of the purse is lining up with the bottom center side of the bag. I'm going to sew just one half to start because it is a trickier seam to sew. And once you reach the corner, you're going to want to trim a diagonal line into the outside piece of the bag, not the bottom, and this will help create a crisper corner. And you're going to do this for every corner of your purse. So you can see the bottom piece is intact, and I've trimmed a corner of the outside piece of the bag. And then you can finish sewing the other side, attaching these two pieces. If you find it easier, you can also cut these corners before you sew. And once you flip it right side out, this should be the bottom of your purse. And you can see I have a center seam on the bottom of my purse because I didn't have a big enough piece to create it all in one. Now I'm going to show you the bias strip technique that we're going to use to finish all of our seams. So I'm going to start by cutting a strip on the bias, and the pink fabric here is going to represent our bag. This isn't a stretch fabric, but as you can see by cutting on the bias, it does create quite a bit of stretch. So you can either fold it over 1 centimeter or fold it over 1 centimeter and tuck it around the edge of the fabric, depending on what works best for the seams that we're trying to cover. And then we can sew that down with a straight stitch. And then we can fold over and iron out what we just sewed. Then we're going to fold the strip 1 centimeter and then fold it over again. And then we can pin in the seam that we sewed, making sure that it's locking the fabric on the back side. And then you're going to sew along where you pinned. And you can sew it right in the seam, or you could sew it on the strip as well. So that's in the seam, and then this is sewing it on the strip, whatever you prefer. It just creates a very clean finish for our edges. We're going to do what we just did along every edge of the bottom of the purse and the 2 side seams of the purse. We want to make sure that the bias strips that we're creating have enough space that we can insert our zap straps. This is going to help create a massive amount of structure for our bag. Depending on the size of your strap, we're just going to leave a little extra room in the channel of the bias strips. So now with all 6 of those seams finished, I'm just going to show you how easy it is to insert the zap straps. And they're really easy to trim as well. Closing the bias strips after I inserted the zap straps is a little tricky, so another technique you can use if you can't get your sewing machine in and you don't feel like hand stitching is you can use a glue gun. Definitely test it on your fabric first, but if there's no issues, you can use this technique for a lot of your finishings. So here I'm just inserting the zip tie into the channel that I created, and I don't want it going into the facing section because then I won't be able to fold it over. Then placing a little bit of glue along that edge, we can just fold that piece up. The gluing technique actually created quite a crisp finish, so I decided to glue down all of my bottom pieces, attaching them to the outside of the bag. Next, we're going to move on to the straps. My jacket had a tie around the waist, so I'm just going to cut that in half, finish the 2 edges that I cut, and then use these as the 2 straps. I'm just tucking in 1 centimeter of that raw edge into the strap, and then I'm going to sew that with a straight stitch. And then I'm going to fold the strap in half and sew it right along the edge. This is because I want a thinner and stiffer strap. I'm going to leave about 7 centimeters on either end, so I'm not sewing the whole strip. This creates a detail that I like, and it's also going to make it easier to attach the straps to the bag. And I'm just going to sew along the 3 edges to attach that. The placement of the straps is totally up to you, but I would try it on before you sew it down and make sure that it fits comfortably and that they're evenly spaced. And here's my straps all done. The last step is optional, and we're going to add our magnetic closure. All you need to do for this is make sure that you're lining it up equally, so at the right height and width on the bag. And then you're going to poke 2 holes, insert the prongs, and then put that little backing on and fold the prongs over. I like to use the backing as a guide for where to mark the 2 holes, and I do that with my seam ripper. I insert the 2 prongs in, put the backing in behind, and fold the prongs over. And you want to make sure that you're only poking through the facing so that you don't see it on the outside of the bag. With the closures all done, you no longer need to access inside the facing, and if you decide to, you can glue that down with your hot glue gun as well. The final optional step that I decided to do was to create a little more structure by stuffing the straps with extra fabric. Just liked the way it looked when it had a little more volume to it. And you're all done! Thank you so much for watching, and if you liked this video, please subscribe.